Hello everybody and welcome back to the Ultimate Fashion History with me, fashion historian and costume consultant Amanda Hallay, and an episode of 20th Century Style Icons. And in this episode, we're going to stir it up, little darlings, by looking at the style influence of the incomparable Bob Marley.
And oh boy, I would love to have Bob Marley and the Wailers accompanying this episode, but if I put as much as one note of Bob Marley in this video, Chris Blackwell will shut me down for copyright infringement. So we'll just have some pretty bland and generic royalty-free reggae instead. And speaking of money, in the description area below the screen you're watching, I've left a link to a donation page at the Skin Cancer Foundation. As you all know, Bob Marley died at the tragically young age of 36 from a very aggressive form of skin cancer. So I thought this episode seemed a fitting one to raise a little money in Mr. Marley's honor for skin cancer research and the care of those suffering from this terrible illness. Some of you who might be new to the channel might be thinking, Amanda, Bob Marley and fashion history? You should be talking about powdered wigs or Regency dresses or what flappers really wore. Well, I've already talked about all those things, and it seems to me that social media cannot stop talking about all of those things. And on the Ultimate Fashion History, I don't want to just add to existing conversations that seem to maintain that fashion history is solely the domain of white European females. I want to start new conversations that offer a different fashion history narrative, a narrative that I think is just as valid and compelling as Regency dresses or what flappers wore. So, enter Bob Marley. Now, I usually start episodes in the 20th Century Style Icon series with a little biography of the person in question. But in the case of Bob Marley, I really don't have to, do I? We all know who Bob Marley is, surely. Not knowing who Bob Marley is like not knowing who Elvis Presley is. It's like not knowing who the Beatles were. It's like not knowing who Marilyn Monroe is. Bob Marley is so etched upon the landscape of contemporary culture that it's almost like a rite of passage, even 4 decades after his death, to discover and then fall in love with Bob Marley. Of course, Bob Marley wasn't the only reggae star to have ever been, but I would wager that he was reggae's only megastar. Even people who don't like reggae like Bob Marley. His sweet message of love and unity coupled with his catchy melodies, infectious beat and mellow voice, as beloved in the decades since his death as they were in his lifetime. He's evidently one of the top 5 richest dead celebrities. His songs were downloaded over 1 billion times in the last 12 months. And I got the idea for this episode from my 15-year-old stepson George, who appeared the other day and was wearing a Bob Marley t-shirt. Now, I should explain that George is no fan of reggae. He listens exclusively to hip-hop, contemporary hip-hop. He has no interest in the roots of hip-hop. He doesn't know who the Sugar Hill Gang were, or Curtis Blow, or Grandmaster Flash, and he wouldn't be interested if we told him he's into Drake and Polo G, not the old stuff, and yet he proudly wears a Bob Marley t-shirt. And he knows nothing about reggae, so I was interested to know what a 15-year-old guy in 2022 feels about a reggae star who died over 4 decades ago. So I asked him, watch this.
Okay, so you are a 15-year-old guy living in 2022. When I say the name Bob Marley, you've got a Bob Marley t-shirt on. What do you think of when you think of Bob Marley?
Iconic.
Iconic.
Absolutely. Amazing musician. Amazing style.
Now, you use the word style there. Would you say that Bob Marley was a 20th century style icon?
It's hard to say. I feel like he could be really part of an icon in like any generation, to be honest.
What a great answer. Thanks, George.
I love George's response there that Bob Marley is an icon for all generations. I absolutely agree with him. And I think the reason he is such an icon, including a 20th century style icon, is that he was so utterly authentic to himself. And this extends to his relationship to fashion, which, in this fashion historian's humble opinion, places him in the pantheon of the great 20th century style icons. And yet, although we all know Bob Marley's impact on popular music and of course his status as a humanitarian and an advocate for the rights of the disenfranchised throughout the world, in the area of fashion, I don't think Bob truly gets his props. I mean, whenever you see those tiresome lists of the 20th century's biggest style icons, it's always the usual suspects, isn't it? The internet would have us believe that the only style icons worth discussing are Audrey Hepburn, Grace Kelly, Marilyn Monroe, Jackie Kennedy. It's always the same list. And they're nearly always women, and they're nearly always white women. And when we do get a list of the greatest male style icons, it seems to be Cary Grant or Sean Connery, but only as James Bond, James Dean, Steve McQueen. Sometimes, if we're lucky, we find Elvis on those lists. And don't get me wrong, I love all those folks, and I've waxed lyrically myself about each and every one of them here on the UFH. But I would argue that today, when it comes to actual street style worn by actual people, Bob Marley has a bigger influence than any of the others. I mean, just look at these street style images from today, and I think we can agree that these kids are far more influenced by the sartorial stylings of Bob Marley than by Steve McQueen in the Thomas Crown affair. So sorry, fashion writers, fashion bloggers, and fashion YouTubers, well, lots of them, but fashion history's truth isn't always what you've decided it is. And I would argue that today there are more young people out there who take inspiration from Bob Marley with his dreads and his field jackets and his double denim than they take from those well-tailored white guys you're always telling us are so important to fashion's history and its legacy. Not only was Bob Marley an enormous fashion influencer, he was a fashion trailblazer who developed a personal style and had a fantastic relationship to fashion, a relationship that really evolved throughout his life. I mean, look at Bob here in the middle in 1963, flanked by Bunny Walker and Peter Tosh in their early carnation as the Teenagers. The look is very slick, it's very Motown, it's very Mad Men. Bob looked like he could be one of the Temptations, yet at some point he abandoned this very American showbiz look and embraced his true style identity. So let's break down some of Bob Marley's most striking contributions to fashion history. And let's start at the top with his hair, his famous dreadlocks. Now, I am not suggesting that Bob Marley was the first person to ever sport dreadlocks. In fact, many fashion and cultural historians think that dreadlocks are so ancient that Cro-Magnon man probably wore them. And our very earliest ancestors dreaded their hair, first accidentally as a result of not having hairbrushes, but then intentionally, and attributed social and cultural and spiritual meaning to them, because we as humans attribute meaning to everything. Sculptures suggest that Mesopotamians may have sported dreadlocks, as many ancient Greeks did. Throughout the world and over the centuries, many cultures have worn dreadlocks. So no, Bob Marley was not the first person to wear dreadlocks. But I'll wager he was the first to wear them on TV. As a child, I grew up in rural England, in the heart of Devon, in the countryside. And I promise you that when Bob Marley appeared on Top of the Pops, we had never seen hair like this. Really, unless you lived in Jamaica or certain pockets of urban Britain, Brixton in London, St. Paul's in Bristol, neighbourhoods in Birmingham, perhaps some urban pockets of the US, you would not have seen a Rastafarian before you saw Bob Marley on TV, and would have no idea of the spiritual importance of dreadlocks to the Rastafarian faith. So by way of his hair alone, Bob Marley informed and educated a world that perhaps wasn't familiar with Rastafarianism or its tenets, and in terms of pure fashion, his dreads were seized upon and copied by many, including, in the early 1980s, one Boy George, who cited Bob Marley as one of his fashion influences. Was this cultural appropriation? Well, obviously. Yet the point remains that it would never have even occurred to Boy George to do this with his hair had it not been for the incredible fashion influence of Bob Marley. Yes, fashion history, and quite rightly, attributes the idea of wearing sportswear as streetwear to the burgeoning hip-hop movement of the late 1970s and early 1980s, with bands like Run DMC and DJs sporting Adidas and Nike as they spun those tracks and wearing trainers. And this started what would become a decades-old street-style trend still with us today, and worn by George, this idea of sportswear as streetwear. But I will dare to suggest that perhaps Bob Marley pitted everyone to the post. An enormous fan of soccer, both watching it and playing it, Bob Marley would wear his soccer stripes, those cool, tight-fitting track tops and pants, as streetwear and stagewear, and he was doing this before hip-hop sporty style was communicated to the masses by way of MTV. Let's talk double denim. You need an awful lot of confidence to make double denim look truly effortless, but Bob carried it off with his signature sense of unfettered cool. He even made patchwork double denim look cool, teamed here with his traditional Rasta cap or tam. And speaking of the Rasta cap, Bob was the first person to communicate this item to a world beyond that of Rastafarianism, and without any thought or consideration to its cultural or spiritual significance, fashion has seized upon it time and time again, as have a zillion white hipsters. But here's the thing, are these designers and Coachella goers appropriating Rastafarian culture? Well, yes, obviously. But is it more a case of appropriating the style of one Rastafarian, of Bob Marley, whose very existence communicates the concept of cool in terms of sartorial expression? The thinking being, well, if Bob Marley wore it, it's going to look good. But it was Bob who made it look good. As I was putting this episode together, I had my laptop open and was looking at a million photos of Bob Marley, and my husband was looking over my shoulder and said, "Is there a picture where Bob Marley doesn't look fantastic?" And actually, no, there is not. Bob made everything look good. This confidence without concern that he exuded to his personal style made everything he wore look great. I mean, imagine this ensemble on anyone other than Bob Marley. But my personal favourite look of Bob Marley's was this one, the khaki field jacket paired with a simple tee and flared denim jeans. Bob was doing combat style before the phrase was even coined, but where's the credit? Oh, there's certainly the imitation of Bob Marley style, but apart from some really great articles in GQ and the likes, internet slew of fashion history experts, many of whom are absolutely excellent and well-informed, they don't seem very interested in talking about Bob Marley. Well, to be honest, they don't seem very interested in talking about people of colour in general in terms of fashion history, to be honest. Maybe that's because they don't get the same amount of views and likes and shares, and I've witnessed this firsthand. For example, 5 years ago, I did an episode on Harry Belafonte and his incredible impact on fashion. And in 5 years, this episode has only had 2,500 views. 2,500 views in over 5 years. Nobody was interested in watching. 2 months ago, I did an episode on Marilyn Monroe, and already it's had almost 40,000 views. And I can almost guarantee that this episode on Bob Marley won't get many views either, but I could not live with myself if I didn't make it. Because how could I call myself a fashion historian if I stuck to that one cliched narrative we are constantly fed without discussing people whose approach to fashion and whose relationship with style influenced so many. And in the case of Bob Marley, not only has his style legacy lived on for 4 decades since his death, but in his own lifetime, he gave the Afro-Caribbean youth of Great Britain, and I'm sure other nations too, a pop star to emulate. All kids and teens want to dress like their favourite pop star, don't they? You should have seen me in my unsuccessful Debbie Harry phase when I was about 13. And Bob Marley gave the children of the Windrush generation a pop star they could relate to and whose style they could copy, as Bob Marley's clothes were affordable: a soccer stripe, a vintage combat jacket, a pair of flared jeans. Well, although we can dress like Bob Marley, we'll never look like Bob Marley, for it was Bob's own utter authenticity when it came to his own sense of style that makes him such a genuine fashion icon. But I think we can all take a tip from his philosophical lookbook. As Bob himself sang, "Don't let them change you or even rearrange you. Wear what you like, and every little thing might just be all right."
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of 20th Century Style Icons here on The Ultimate Fashion History with me, Amanda Hallay. You can contact me through my website. I'll leave the deets below. I don't do comments here, but if you want to chat about all of this good stuff, join the Ultimate Fashion History Facebook group. Alternatively, if you prefer books to fashion, join the Dean Street Press Facebook group. That's our publishing company, and I'll be back very soon with more on the UFH. And until then, remember Bob Marley's message: one love. Bye for now.